enriching our present and future teachers, echoing God's Word to the world, preparing for new pastoral needs, forming our future leaders, following our call from God. This is our vision for the future.
Probably one of the best. I'm welcoming you to a very special vision for the future today. If you recognize our guest, it's Father David Norris. And what we're going to do today, believe it or not, is not just talk about the vision for the future of the Diocese of Fresno, but we're going to go back to the future and visit with the Vatican Council, which began 49 years ago to the day that we are filming this program. Father David, where were you on October 11th, 1962?
Well, I was thinking of that today. Thank you, Jim. It's nice to be here with you and talk about the Second Vatican Council. I was in high school at the time, and I was in a Catholic high school, and I had been an altar server at Mass. So I was very familiar with the Catholic Church of the 50s and 60s, you know, up until that point, and was surprised, I think, like everyone else. The sisters in school told us this was a great event that was happening for our church. We had a new Pope, Pope John XXIII, who had been Pope for just a few years, from 1958. So it was a great sense of something new going on in the Catholic Church worldwide, and even back in Providence, Rhode Island, where I was at the time, we knew all about it.
You know, you and I share so much. We are geographically located. We were in Worcester, just above Providence. Same time, same schooling, Catholic school, praying for the council, and then going to seminary at high school. So we share that moment in time. Now, we also share a picture that we're going to show, but you're going to tell me if this really and truly is something you saw in your lifetime. Is this picture of the church giving a good idea of what we were doing in 1962, or is it something that really doesn't give us a good idea? Is this what we were doing?
Well, you know, that brought back a lot of memories when I first saw that, because I was one of those people at the end of the train. Not at the bishop's end, but one of the altar servers. I grew up in the cathedral parish in Providence, and very often when the bishop celebrated the high mass on Sunday, that's how he entered. He wore the long train with an ermine capa magna carried by devoted train bearers in the solemn procession entering. So, I mean, it's very reminiscent of what I experienced.
Now, what's so exciting, Father David, is those are days all gone. We'll never see that long train. All of a sudden, there's a new breath of air blowing in the church, all because of this great man, John XXIII. I think we have a picture of him, and on January 25th in 1959, John XXIII made a proclamation, and what was he telling all the world?
Well, he had just been Pope for a few months, John XXIII, when he announced to a group of cardinals gathered at the Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls in Rome, that he was going to have not only a synod for the Diocese of Rome, which some of them had been thinking about, but he was going to call an ecumenical council, a council of all of the bishops of the world. And that was quite a remarkable announcement because of the times and because of his age and because of the expectations of his pontificate. Many of the cardinals were quite surprised by that, as he himself mentioned when he reported about their reaction.
Yeah, they thought they had this pope that would be holding the place together for 2 or 3 years, not upsetting the apple cart, because Pius XII had done so well for 19 years. Let's put an old man, let him just ease in and ease out.
Yep.
And then he calls this meeting. And if we look at the next slide, we start seeing something that Father Marins has created for us, Jose Marins, a series of pictures. Now, there is the day that you were talking about. Is there anything more about that event you want us to know before we see the next slide?
Well, you know, it was the end. January 25th is the end of the annual world observance of the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, and so that is one of the sites and the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. January 25th was the end of that observance, what used to be called the Church Unity or the Chair of Unity octave, and the Pope took that opportunity to mention and to announce that there was going to be an ecumenical, which means worldwide, council, and ecumenical in the sense that we think of it nowadays, especially involving other faiths and other world religions, which came to be. So that was the site of the announcement that we just saw.
Now we're going to be looking, if you don't mind, with a few pictures that are going to be helping us tell our story with some visual. We know that Father David will give the commentary, but let's see what Father Jose Marins has given us as a slide. The next one is going to be telling us about the announcement or the speech at the council as it was beginning on September 11th. What did the Pope say that day, Father David?
Well, that was a remarkable gathering, just to begin with, of the priests from the bishops from all over the world. The Church feels the duty to honor its responsibility in the face of the actual exigencies and needs of the people regarding the world in which we live, especially as the quote says, the world of the poor. And I think that's a great thing to try to get a sense of, that, like that old television program, You Are There, to sort of place us in the time and in the circumstances that Pope John XXIII and many of the Council Fathers that came from many of these poorest countries in the world related to when the Pope opened the Council on that day.
There had been 20 other ecumenical councils, but the next slide is going to remind us that this is really one of the most important ever, which is to not overstate the case that this council was long overdue and very timely. Let's see what this next one tells us.
The outline of what the Church was to be about, one of the goals of the Council, and summed up very well there, of the role of revelation and the Scriptures and tradition of the Church, the liturgy, and the whole idea of what is the Church, what is the definition of the Church, and some of those terms that are there that had not been used a whole lot before that Council, the whole idea of the people of God, of collegiality, and then the Church in dialogue with the modern world. That was a new concept ever since the Council of Trent. There had not been a major council of the Church except for Vatican I, which was really an internal council back at the end of the 19th century, and which really was interrupted by war in Italy, so that council actually never came to a fitting conclusion, but it was certainly not a worldwide council addressed to all of the peoples of the world.
Another thing that makes this council so special is that there's really 5 perspectives that are really clearly going to be coming out in documents that are going to be seen in the interplay among the cardinals and the bishops. Let's see those 5 perceptions, those 5 perspectives, and how important they turn out to be for us.
This was sort of the overview of what the goals of the Council would be and what the spirit of the Council would be, that Italian word, aggiornamento, updating the Church, as Pope John XXIII himself said. The deposit of faith, the gift of the faith remains the same, but the way of expressing it in dialogue with the world, the concept of the Church, paradigm or the idea of what the Church is, the model of the Church, a council that was pastoral in the sense it was going to address the needs of the people in the Church, and the option for the poor, which became a very heavy emphasis of the council as well, to deal with the changes in the world at that time and even to today.
Now, what we're going to want to do to help everyone who's watching the program appreciate the clarity of our 2 programs this week and next, let's unpack those 5 concepts one by one and start seeing a little bit more about what that updating might mean for the Church. It's a great word, aggiornamento. It sounds like oh, that sounds good, Jim, but what is it? What would that mean, Father David? Updating, aggiornamento. Where would we see it in our lives?
I think the first document of the Council, which we'll talk about later on, had to do with the liturgy. The sacred liturgy was the first document actually issued by the Second Vatican Council, and that was an immediate change, an immediate opening of the language of the liturgy of the Mass to the vernacular, the language that was used in the nation, the country of the people, in our case in the United States in English. The whole idea of giving not a new face to the Church, but giving a face of a Church dialoguing with the world and encountering the world. And I think that was part of this updating process, that it was going to be really speaking to and in dialogue with the modern world. And that was something new, because a lot of the previous councils were just dealing with the internal church. They were speaking to the bishops, speaking to the Catholic faithful. Even papal encyclicals were not really addressed beyond the boundaries. This was a church that was going to be updating in that sense, that it was going to be dialoguing with the world.
Believe it or not, that's the very next principle that Father Marins wants us to talk about. The idea of the dialogue with the world, which I think you've made it clear, but just to say it, that was covered. Thank you. Dialogue with the world, one thing I'm looking at it is that the whole document Gaudium et Spes decides to be the document that wants to address something of the church in relationship to others, not the church about herself, which is Lumen Gentium. So even certain documents wind up taking on one of those 5 aspects as their leitmotif, as their direction.
Right, exactly right. And that whole attitude of dialogue with the world was certainly not something that had been a common practice in the definition of the church or in the role of the church up until that time. But that was certainly a theme that was set. It was set by Pope John XXIII in a couple of his major encyclicals, Mater et Magistra, Pacem in Terris. He was dealing really with issues that were of crucial importance to all the peoples of the world, not just to Catholics, not just to people within the church, but the church, again, in the modern world, which was one of the major documents of the council, was seeking to bring the message of the church into dialogue with the real issues of where people were, where they were living, what their experiences were.
And then the next one that Father gives us is change of style. Now, there's ways that a style can be cosmetic, but then there's a way that a style can be very major. It's a substantial change of style. Father David.
Yeah, and just those who were invited to the council, not only the bishops and the auditors of the council, but observers from other churches, from the Orthodox churches, from Protestant churches, people of various backgrounds and religions were there to actually observe the council and to be in the St. Peter's Basilica while the council was going on. It was certainly an opening of the doors in that sense, in a very representative way, that men and women religious were there. There were, we'll see some of the experts, the theological experts that were there. So it really opened the doors of the Basilica of St. Peter's to the whole world. It was truly, in that sense, ecumenical, that it was reaching out to the whole world and inviting in even people who were not part of the Catholic Church. And that was certainly a change from previous eras and from previous centuries.
You know, the quote that I'm looking at right now, when Pope John began the council with his opening, what was almost a keynote address. It's as if he were at a democratic convention and he's giving the keynote to get the bishops all onto it. 2,400 of his friends that he brought in. And here's what he said to them. The church has always opposed errors. Frequently she has condemned them with the greatest severity. Nowadays, however, the spouse of Christ prefers to make use of the medicine of mercy rather than of severity. She considers that she meets the needs of the present day by demonstrating the validity of her teaching rather than by condemnation. What a change of style.
Exactly, and mentioning the Council of Trent, from the 16th century, of course, that was right after the Reformation. The whole atmosphere of the world was very different, but certainly the attitude of the documents of the Council of Trent, with its repetition of anathema sit, which is a Latin phrase which means let Latin be anathema. It was a whole series of reading the Riot Act to the reformers, to the Protestants, saying if anyone says this which contradicts the Catholic Church teaching, let him be anathema. So it was a very confrontative attitude toward the world and toward others. Certainly not an attitude of dialogue or the medicine of mercy, as John the 23rd said. But it was a different century, and as the more you read of history, the more you see that the Church really tried to address things according to the norms of that time. But it certainly wouldn't work in the world of the 21st century.
Interesting, Father David, you say history, because in all the popes that we've had, usually they are specializing in one form of either formation, study, discipline, experience. Well, John the 23rd was also a historian. So it turns out that his own academic training would have put him in touch with church history more than dogmatics, more than liturgics. He was a historian, and that helped him because he could see what happened during Trent, what happened during Vatican I, and could actually vision some alternative because he himself would not have been comfortable with that type of a church.
Correct. And of course his experience in the Papal Diplomatic Corps, I mean, he had lived in France, he was the Apostolic Nuncio to Bulgaria, so I mean he had a world vision that had gotten him outside the Vatican circle and being Patriarch of Venice as well. So I mean he had a pastoral sense as well as a world vision, I think, when he came into this.
He had a world vision, and we have a demand to take a break. So we'll be back in exactly 1 minute. So you may want to just sit still, get ready, grab a pen, because we're going to be telling you where you can learn a lot more about all this of Vatican II. Stay tuned.
Our vision for the future will be right back. KNXT would like to thank Ventura TV Video Appliance Center for their support of our vision for the future. Ventura TV Video Appliance Center, the local choice for brand name appliances and electronics since 1951.
Thank you for joining us again for the second half of our program. You're probably wondering, what is the next slide? I'm going to tell you. It's pastoral. And the reason being, another dimension that the council definitely wanted to be is pastoral. Father David, what would that mean when the Pope says, I want it to be pastoral?
Well, it takes up what we were saying before the break, that attitude of anathema, which you see on the screen there, no anathema, no condemnations, but simply a dialogue and promoting the image of the church as the servant church, after the example of Jesus, who said, I have not come to be served, but to serve, and to speak with people of goodwill throughout the world on what is the mission of the church, what is the mission of the Christian in the modern world. That's what pastoral means. We associate it with the pastor of a church or someone who's involved in pastoral ministry, but it really means an attitude of willingness to serve, willingness to listen, and to share the burdens of society, the burdens of those people who need assistance.
Now, when you say the burdens of those needing assistance, it becomes the very fifth principle, the fifth engine, the fifth direction, the fifth priority of the council is the poor. Let's see what Father Marins gives us here, because this is so important that the church was not going to be dealing with the elite only, not with the first world only, but with the Church Universal.
Now we move not only John the 23rd, but his successor, Pope Paul VI, in 1963, and those are some of the major names of some of the council fathers, Cardinal LERCARO, Dom Helder Camara, who was the wonderful South American bishop, who spoke of the preferential option for the poor, and who gave that message in a very powerful way, based on their own pastoral experience. Again, that there was more to the church than just the liturgical or just the institutional aspects of it, but that there was a real need to, as Jesus did in the gospel, to pay attention to the physical and the human needs of the people around him. And that's what one of the messages that the council very much stressed.
Now, one cardinal who is on my good list, because I must admit, some of the cardinals in that council were weights. They were holding everything back. They were making John the 23rd just have to work so hard to get the council off the ground. They didn't want it. But one cardinal from Italy in Bologna, Cardinal LERCARO, is one of my heroes. Let's see the picture of Cardinal LERCARO and something that he said.
Yeah, the Archbishop of Bologna, right toward the beginning of the council, talked about that idea of underlying those dimensions of the council, the mystery of Christ in the poor, the dignity of the poor and the reign of God in the church. And that certainly has become one of the emphases, that it comes through in all of the council documents. It was in documents of Pope John XXIII, certainly in those encyclicals that I mentioned earlier, but it became sort of one of those elements that was a thread that ran through a lot of the documents, especially in regard to the church in the modern world. You know, the very opening of that document, you know, the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the people of this age are also the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the church. And, you know, because nothing that is genuinely human is outside of our concern, you know. So it was certainly an attitude of taking care of the whole person, as Jesus himself did, and of being concerned about those issues in the modern world.
And then what the cardinal did is actually in his interventions, because what happened at the council, each one of the bishops, the 2,400, could put their hand up and get their paper down so that they'd get their 5 minutes of an intervention. And sure enough, one of the times when he stood up, Cardinal LERCARO said exactly what's going to be on the screen now, because he asked the council to do something.
The mystery of Christ in the poor of the earth and the mystery of the church, the mother of the poor. That was one of his emphases, and he certainly got a good hearing from a lot of the bishops who were there from Africa, from South America, from many of those parts of the world where grinding poverty was and still remains, sadly, a key issue. And grace builds upon nature is one of the great principles of theology and of pastoral ministry. The grace of God is always there present, but it builds upon the natural disposition of people, so you're not going to get a very good hearing from people about the good news of the scriptures and the teaching of Christ if their stomach is empty or if they're, you know, oppressed by all the burdens of life. So.
Now, John the 23rd had said that we must be responsive to the signs of the times. So now what the cardinal, this is still continuing with LERCARO, he says, fine, and this is the hour. Never mind the times, this is the hour. The hour of the poor. What else, Father David?
And that the church has a concern for that. And I love that image, the mystery of the church, mother of the poor, the mystery of Christ in the poor. You know, we're very familiar with chapter 25 of Matthew's Gospel, which speaks directly to what we traditionally called the spiritual and corporal works of mercy in the church. So these are not like brand new that they just came up from the council, because as I said, I was in Catholic grammar school before the council. We heard about the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, and so they were a part of the church, but they were getting renewed emphasis. Now they were getting it from the top, if you will. I mean, from an ecumenical council, from those who were speaking for the worldwide church, and giving increased publicity to them, and giving a new face to that, and that image of the church as one who has a maternal care for those who are in need.
And so much of what you just said was actually encapsulated in the opening address of the Pope. I think we have his picture now to let us see something of what John said, something about what he did. It was monumental that he set such a tone in his presentation. That opening prayer. Here's some quotes from it. David, can you read them?
One of those quotes that you've already used about the medicine of mercy, but that the church show herself a loving mother of all, be benign, patient, full of mercy. May the council respond to the hopes and needs of all people. And using that image of the apostles in Acts chapter 3, verse 6, where the healing power of Jesus for the lame person there that is healed by the apostles continues in the work of the church. The church is always seeking to do what it sees Jesus doing, to imitate Christ in that ministry and that mission and that way of dealing with human need.
Now our next picture is really going to take a few minutes to unpack, because it's showing us 4 balloons, you might say, 4 processes that are going to all happen in their time, and they're all called Vatican II. But let's look at that schematic and unpack it just a little. What it's going to do is show us that there is a preparation to the council, then there's the event of the council, then there's the texts that come out of the council, and then there's the reception, the interpretation, and the application. Father David, on any of those, do you want to unpack that balloon a little and let us know how, if we talk about Vatican II, we're talking about all of that. We're not talking about the red book or the blue book. What are we talking about Vatican II?
Well, in a sense, the important one of those is not the balloons necessarily, but its life, that arrow, that red arrow that comes in. It was the life experience of so much of the world, of the Council Fathers, of Pope John XXIII, Pope Paul VI, that started off the process, started the ball rolling, and the preparation for the Council, which took a while itself, which then led to the text. And we're still really in that phase of unpacking what the Council was and unpacking the message of the Council. It's been nearly 50 years, but as even some of the Council Fathers said after the Council, it was going to take decades, if not a century, to really unpack and to really implement everything that the Council did, because it was so densely packed with so many different things.
We've got a few more pictures we might like to treat you before we finish our first program, which will be the first half of a series. Let's show that Basilica of St. Peter's, because one thing is to appreciate that this is the setting. Imagine having a setting that glorious, 2,400 men gathered from across the globe for the first time. The Vatican Council I, that met in the Vatican, obviously, 90 years before, had like 800 people, and all of them Europeans, and a few Americans, and a few South Americans, but that's about it. Whereas this council is from everywhere. And the next picture actually shows how these bishops are all gathering. David, do you want to unpack anything about that setting of the meeting?
Well, it certainly gives an image of the church as an institution and as pointed toward heaven. The whole image of the Basilica of St. Peter's, for those who have been there, it certainly turns your mind toward God and toward the idea of reverence. And having this council gathered in that assembly, in that church, in that magnificent basilica, represented the church, the history of the church and the movement of the church, but certainly the international character of all those people in there gave us a thrust in a whole new direction forward into history.
Speaking of forward into history, please set your DVRs to be back next week at the same time, because Father David and I are going to continue this merry romp through Vatican Council II. We've only touched the surface. We've barely begun our conversation. Please join us next week. We hope you enjoyed this and that you are learning more about the faith that is ours today. God bless.
Enriching our present and future teachers, echoing God's Word to the world, preparing for new pastoral needs, forming our future leaders, following our call from God. Thank you for joining us for our Vision for the Future.